So for that, here's what I'll say. Can I just and maybe this would be a bad idea. I don't know. You could tell me, but I could just kind of ramble off a few different categories of some things that I think about that scare the hell out of me. And we can talk about all of those or any of those, whichever ones interest you the most. And then we can pivot to I guess the sunshine, the light at the end of the tunnel if you want.
I think there's a couple topics that we can both agree on, but I think that kind of where I'd like to tee into this is I think that there are topics that are important, and then there are topics that are covered that are not important.
Oh, I love you so much. Yes.
So why don't we because this happens all the time, and frankly, this comes from both the right and the left. The right is very easily distracted by things that are unimportant. So
you don't have any recent examples of that, do you, Doctor?
Oh, I do have a recent example of that, Truman. How about the 2 straight weeks of the Daily Wire complaining about Joe Biden's doctorate? Yep. That is something that is unimportant. And people thought that, it was ridiculous. And people thought that I was only annoyed about that because I have a PhD. Like, I never gave 2 flips if people called me doctor or not. I was annoyed about it because I was like, the election has just happened. There's stuff going on that I can't even talk about on YouTube anymore, which we'll get to the censorship stuff in a second, that is actually important. The critical race theory is about to come in and take over everything because Biden's going to get rid of all these executive orders. And you guys are concerned about whether or not Joe Biden is called doctor. Like, that was one of the stupidest things that has ever happened in the history of stupid.
It's the worst hill to die on. I don't understand it. Yeah. So no, I love that. So, I know that I told you this whenever we talked the other day, but just for those watching, what you just said is absolutely right. I wrote about this in a piece that I put on my locals. I think it was sometime in December, and I was just thinking about how important it is that we really calibrate our sense-making apparatus internally. Because let's take the practical example of what we saw and then kind of how we can avoid it. What we saw over the last 4 years was that everything was ratcheted up to 11. And so the general response, to anything that came out of the Trump administration or anything that was perceived as a threat to the establishment was cranked up to 11. So it wasn't that we were arresting people at the border. It's kids in cages. It's concentration camps. It wasn't that, there was a clash of, people in Kenosha's, Kyle Rittenhouse, and these white supremacists were out murdering BLM activists in the street, and so on and so forth. And so and it's that Trump is a Russian plant and fascist and Nazi and white supremacist. Like, we saw the normalization of some of the most hyper dangerous words that you could imagine. And we saw a little bit of this prior to that, or prior to the 2016 election with the punch a Nazi kind of thing. And just, Nazi doesn't mean anything. We saw it with the on-campus stuff where rape doesn't mean anything, where, people saying if a person was standing next to them, that's rape. And so it waters down the experience of people who are actually raped. So we saw that happen. And I think one of the best ways to put it is that, or at least for me, when I think about it, if I try to put myself in the shoes of people let's say maybe in the media or those who were on the left and were pissed off that Trump was president, is they took the fact that they felt an emotion of maybe anger, frustration, anxiety, or something whenever they were reminded of the current situation, and they interpreted that as a legitimate threat or something serious and something to respond to. And one of the things that made me think that, and why I even wrote that article, is that I was noticing that if I just saw a headline, so I've got a bunch of news apps on my phone, news, we need a new word for that, by the way, but a bunch of those apps on my phone. And if I would get a headline update notification that was President-elect Biden or something about Kamala Harris or any of that fawning, sycophantic crap that they've been on since the election, I would just get pissed off just from seeing it. And I realized that, okay, I need to, look internally, have a little bit of self-awareness, and am I pissed at the content of this article? Because if I read the article, there's nothing here. There's nothing actionable in this article that I need to be worried about on a practical level. I think I'm just frustrated that I'm being reminded of the situation we're now in. And so I wrote this thing that I called a guide to red objects, and it was red balloons, red flags, and red alerts. And I talked about the song 99 Red Balloons by Nina, which I love that song. It's just a great song anyway. I think it's a pretty genius song. And the premise is, for anyone who's lived under a rock, is these kids go and buy a bunch of red balloons. And the song was written kind of at the end of the Cold War, in the mid 80s. And they buy a bunch of red balloons and they let them go, and it shows up on the radar of the various war machines, and they think that World War III has started. And so it starts this nuclear holocaust that ends in the destruction of the planet, all because these people saw these red balloons and they took it as an act of war, and they couldn't discern between something that was actually a threat and something that wasn't. The end of the song, it's all over and I'm standing pretty in this dust that was a city. Like it's a great song. I think it's really beautifully written, if I haven't mentioned that. So, but my point is that there's a lot of things that we're going to see, coming out of the news or on social media. I got rid of Facebook, which my life's already better for that, but that people are going to see, whether they're scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, or just, paying attention to kind of what's going on, Twitter or whatever, that I think the overwhelming majority of it's going to be red balloons. That's going to be things that kind of show up on the radar and will elicit a reaction in them, but there's really nothing there. And they're just frustrated by being reminded of the situation that we're in. And I think probably a lot of the people in your audience will identify with that, of, just seeing, whenever, like during the inauguration, for example, they're talking about the lights, in the Capitol represent Joe Biden's arms wrapped around the country. Like
God.
that is some disgusting sycophantic crap. And it enrages me. But there's nothing there. That's just like, I don't get new information from that. It's just a reminder of information I already have, which is our news isn't news. It's a propaganda arm of the leftist establishment.
Well, and I want to interject here because it's not only that these news stories are unimportant. It's not only that these news stories are not giving us any new information. It's that they are specifically intended to be a distraction.
Absolutely. Yep.
That is the goal of the news story. So every time people on the right, or who are trying to fight back against this ideology, because they're not all on the right, but anytime someone who's trying to fight back against this gives into this inclination to complain about these news stories, complain about CNN and how someone on CNN said something stupid for 3 days, or complain about Jill Biden's doctorate or whatever, they're winning. They're very literally winning. You are allowing them to win based on where you're putting your energy and attention, because you've removed all your energy from the things that are actually important to focus on complaining.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's not a net neutral. It's not neutral to be distracted by that. It's actually a net negative, because you're dedicating energy to something that's unimportant, and as such, you're removing your potential to give energy to things that are important and that do require energy. I think that's exactly right. It's the very first YouTube video I ever made was in response to Parkland. And it wasn't about Parkland, it was about the news media. And I talked about how, people want, whenever, especially when they're scared or when they're angry, they want quick answers to complicated questions. And they will accept anyone who will confidently offer them a quick, oversimplified answer to a complicated question. And that's the mental equivalent of fast food. It is, it might be filling at the time, but it has no nutritional value. And if that's all you consume intellectually is that oversimplified distraction crap to complex issues or to issues that don't even matter at all, it's going to be really bad for you mentally. The way if you only eat Big Macs, it's going to be bad for you physically. Although I guess maybe Trump is the exception, because I thought that dude mostly ate just like Big Macs or Whoppers or something.
He loves fast food. He does.
Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, that's exactly right. So there's going to be a lot of red balloons that are out there intended as a distraction for us. But there some of those things, I think that if you were going to put things in, like classify them of quantity of greatest to least, the greatest is going to be red balloons. And then the second most is going to be red flags, where it's like, okay, no, that should worry you, right? So I'm getting these things about climate justice and these executive orders about climate justice and how he's, pausing drilling and, fracking and all this other stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's a red flag to me, depending on exactly where it is, what the implications are for our energy independence and those kinds of things. But again, it's not really anything that's manifested yet. Like whenever we see like things, them talking about doing this or talking about wanting to pursue something, that's still kind of opaque and vague, that's something we should pay attention to. Like that article I sent you the other day about how they're going to look at regulations, no longer from a financial standpoint, but from, I know they threw the word in there, economic, but it was mostly about equity and justice and all these other, really broadly defined words that they could use to justify whatever they wanted. That's a red flag to me, but I haven't seen a policy come from it yet. I haven't seen a regulation be put in place yet that's based on that has tangible results. And then there's the last one that I think that we will have happen, that we already are seeing happen, but are going to be the smallest in nature, and that the red balloons serve to distract us from is the red alerts. Like, so for example, every federal contractor or every teacher being required to take CRT training, that's a red alert to me, because you're now instantiating this as accepted doctrine, and you're ensuring that the federal government is backing this and saying, like, that really kind of puts it on par with any like curriculum that's taught in schools. Like, it's another way of saying, of packaging as accepted fact, which is really scary, to be honest with you. Whenever the federal government puts a stamp and says, this isn't optional, you're required to learn this. Well, there's lots of things that we're required to learn. We're required to learn, like get our driver's license if we want to know how to drive. Like anytime the federal government mandates that we be educated in something, it's because they're presumably it's important for our day-to-day lives, that it's a fact that we have to know and have to have in order to be good citizens of the United States. And whenever they instantiate things that are not just demonstrably false, but harmful to the social fabric and everyone, not just on the receiving end of it, but those who internalize it themselves, that's a big problem. That's a big issue. And so that would be an example of a red alert in my mind. But to the broader point, like we do have, like what you said, there's gonna be a lot of noise, a lot of distraction, and people who are interested in knowing, like, okay, I'm pissed, I'm angry, I'm anxious, whatever that describes a lot of us right now at any given time. We have to have a really well-calibrated sense-making mechanism, because let's, again, to look at the contrast of the last 4 years, the left generally, I use this very general, we need better terms, and the media did not have really well-calibrated sense-making mechanisms. Now, I'm not sure they're interested in that, but the point is that they turned every molehill into a mountain. They made everything cranked up to 11. They created this false perception, this false environment of chaos, and they lost a lot of credibility with a lot of people because of the fact that they were willing to just treat everything like the biggest threat in the world, and not focus on the things that matter. And so we don't want to do that, I guess, is my point.
Right.
And in order to do that, we have to be incredibly intentional, because here's the problem. This only comes through intentionally doing it and developing it. If you're like just kind of on autopilot with this stuff, then it won't happen. You have to cultivate this and intentionally go, okay, I'm going to, and it's work. And that's the other thing that sucks about it. Cause like you said, most people just want to go home and watch their shows and not do this work. But it's one more thing that we have to do if we don't want to fall into that same trap. And which means that they will, and I'll close it here. If we do get distracted, if we do just chase red balloons for the next however many years, then they will get away with whatever the bigger thing is that's taking place. Eric Weinstein talks about how the idealism of every age is what's used to mask its theft. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And so we will be distracted with, the Dr. Jill Biden stuff or whatever thing, fawning news coverage with CNN. And the real stuff will be happening behind us in the background if we don't really calibrate our sense-making mechanisms well. All right.
Well, and I want to just throw one more wrench into the works, because I think that the reason that red balloons, the reason that red balloons are so effective is that they're usually the sexy things, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're the things that are like easy to understand, easy to grasp. Like it makes people angry right away. It's like they have a visceral reaction to these things. Like the amount, and I do hate to keep going back to this example, but it really is just the best example that has happened lately. Like calling Jill Biden Dr. Biden just viscerally pisses people off. for no good reason. Like there's no value in a title that you don't give it. So like there's no reason that this pisses people off, but it pissed people off so much that there were news stories about it every single day for 2 goddamn weeks.
Yep.
And it's like, it's so easy to get sucked into this. And I think that a lot of people, and especially the people that, I mean, frankly, like we saw a lot of high information people susceptible to this, like low information people that we're always trying to reach. They don't give 2 shits if we call Jill Biden doctor. Like no one really cares. But it's like the people, this is probably why it bothered me so much. These are the people that should know better. And they're just as susceptible. And I think a lot of times high information voters, they put themselves up on this little pedestal. They say, well, we have the information and we have the facts, and those silly peons, they'll just watch CNN and they don't know what they're talking about. Ha ha ha. Yeah, I mean, they can be just as elitist, frankly, as someone that has a Harvard degree and thinks that a Harvard degree makes them better and smarter than everyone else. And they do the exact same thing. And then they get sucked so easily into these nonsense fights. But it's because that's the sexy thing. The red alerts, like what you're talking about, these are usually like the least sexy thing in the world. It requires you to read policy documentation. It requires you to read academic stuff that's boring to read. And it takes more time to wrap your head around it and understand it. And that's what makes it so insidious and so dangerous, is like, in order to really fight the battles that we need to fight and that are worth fighting, to maintain, free speech and make sure that we can just move forward functionally as a society, we need to do the things that are frankly the most boring.
Yep. That's right. You ever watch Rick and Morty?
No.
Oh man. Okay. So it's a great show. And I know there's probably like everyone who's watching this had one of 2 reactions, like, oh yeah, I love Rick and Morty, or this is one of those assholes that watches Rick and Morty. So fine. I don't care. But there's this episode. It's kind of like one of the most notorious episodes of the show called Pickle Rick. And, Rick, he's this genius scientist, and he turns himself into a pickle to get out of going to family therapy. And at the end of it, the therapist goes into this diatribe. Actually, Susan Sarandon guest stars as the voice for her. And she just talks about the nature of work and how it's boring, and how in order, like the most important things for maintenance, how she basically tells Rick, I have no doubt you would be bored during this session the same way I'm bored every time I brush my teeth or wipe my ass, because that's the thing about maintenance, like maintaining yourself physically and mentally. It's work, and there's nothing, you can't do it so wrong that you die, but it's still necessary in order to be a healthy person. And like to what you just said, like, yeah, the things that are the most unglamorous and that are the most, I guess maybe tedious or monotonous, whatever word you want to use there to describe it, they are work, but they're also what's necessary. Just like that, brushing your teeth or wiping your ass or whatever, like that is absolutely crucial. Like if someone said like, hey, I stopped doing either of those things, you'd be like, well, you should probably see someone. But at the same time, those are the most like mundane, kind of average everyday things, but that are necessary for our maintenance. And I think in the same way, like what you're talking about, our maintenance as like, whether it's an informed citizen or someone who, does have skin in the game, someone who needs to be involved in these things, it's boring work. It's not glamorous. It's not sexy stuff. Like you said, it's policy. It requires understanding things that, again, most people are interested in and frankly are justified in not being interested in. I mean, think about this, like politics, let's take it whenever politics wasn't like everything's the end of the world and no one accepts elections and all this other stuff. Prior to that, it was kind of this niche thing, whenever I was younger, my bachelor's is in political science. I always said that election year was kind of like my Super Bowl or my playoffs. I just thought it was interesting and entertaining. It's a niche thing that not everyone is interested in. But right now, everyone is required, I think, or at least being told that they have to take a side, that they have to take an interest in it. Like imagine if every single person in the country right now was forced to, for threat of losing social relationships or their jobs to really care about the Super Bowl here, in, I guess, a week and a half. Like that's not fair for people to have to do. Most people don't care about the Super Bowl. A lot of people do. I'm one of those people. You can't really see it. I got my Chiefs hats over there. Like, okay, I get it. But it's that same kind of thing where something that's really niche and that most people don't have an inherent interest in are being told, you have to care, you have to have an opinion, you have to be able to talk about this around the water cooler or whatever, to use that, kind of old, picture of the corporate environment. Otherwise, like, you risk being alienated, you risk saying the wrong thing or whatever. And the way to do it effectively is to engage in that boring, mundane work. And the easier way to do it is to just say, go with the flow and go along with whatever the accepted orthodoxy is. And so I just want to again acknowledge, it sucks that people have to do that. It sucks that they're being required to be sucked into this thing that they didn't ask for, they don't care about. And frankly, that they shouldn't necessarily care about it. It shouldn't be that important. There's a lot more to life than politics and this ideological crap. Like most things in life are not about those things. But that's what's required of us. Like I said the other day to you, every age has something that's required of the people living in it. Every time has something that's required of the people living in it. If you look back at various times in history, to times when things were a lot worse than they are now. I would put like World War II in that time frame. Like, there were people that just wanted to live their lives that were all of a sudden required to get involved in the war effort. Whenever Pearl Harbor happened, my grandpa and my grandma were living in southern Iowa. My grandpa had a newborn kid. He was in his late 20s, and they owned a tractor implement dealership where they would sell, to people in Iowa and Missouri who needed this stuff for their farming equipment. And Pearl Harbor happened, and my grandpa joined the Navy and moved out took my grandma and his young son out to California. And he didn't know how to swim, and he served the entire war in the Pacific Theater on a ship that transported supplies and stuff to the battleships. But the point is that he didn't want to do that. He wasn't asked to do that. And I'm not equating us to people who, go storm the beaches at D-Day. Far from it. But my point is that every time has something that's asked of you, whether it's fair or not, whether it's what you want to do or not. The question isn't, is it fair? The question isn't, do you want to do it? The question is it necessary? And everything we're talking about here is necessary, regardless of how much of our emotions are connected to it.